I'm Sam.
And I'm Jackson, and this is Your Press Release. Welcome to another episode of Your Press Release. Today we have with us Gardner Crane. Gardner Crane has been active in the real estate investment and development business since 1997. He is president and CEO of Uinta Land Company. Gardner founded Uinta Land Company in February of 2004. Prior to founding Uinta Land, he was responsible for land acquisition, project management, and government approvals at Pleasant Valley Investments, the investment arm of Woodside Homes, one of the world's largest private home building companies at the time. Gardner earned a bachelor's degree from Weber State University, where he majored in German and minored in business management. He also earned an MBA from the Marriott School of Management at Brigham Young University. Prior to entering the real estate business, Gardner worked for BMW in Munich, Germany, in Cybel Systems, one of the world's fastest growing software companies at the time. So thank you for being here, Gardner. Is there anything that bio does not cover that you should tell us about?
Yeah, it misses a lot of things. The way more important than those facts. I'm a father of four and very happily married to my dream girl, Krista Crane. Two girls, two boys, 20-year-old and 22-year-old daughters, and then 14 and 16-year-old sons. The two boys are still at home. The second daughter is currently serving a mission for the LDS Church in Costa Rica right now. And then my oldest daughter is pursuing a marketing degree down at BYU in Provo, Utah.
Okay.
So I'm a family man at heart, and that bio, which I can only blame myself because I wrote that, doesn't mention the things that are most important to me.
Yeah.
And so we'll get into how my values, as I just explained, have influenced most of my career decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll get into everything in more detail, but I just wanted to start off asking you a question about my own personal life and see what your thoughts are on it. So
Okay.
my wife, Grace, and I, we just purchased a home in Henderson, Nevada. And we have this idea that maybe in the next 2 to 3 years, we could get it paid off and then take out a home equity line of credit and use that to put down payments on a few homes and then start getting into real estate investment that way and rental properties that way. Is that a good, at least in your mind and your experience, is that a good route to go with that?
Well, I would say I would qualify it all with the response that it depends on some other, but generally speaking, I would say yes. And here's why. The real reason the real estate business can be so profitable is simply because of the availability of debt. If you started your own software company and went to a bank and said, "Hey, I want to borrow $1 million to fund my startup software company, and I only want to pay 5 to 7% interest," they're going to laugh at you. But if you go into a bank and you say, "Hey, I want to buy this duplex," it's already got tenants in it, and the revenue generated by renting out these units will service the debt, will cover the payment. That's a much easier sell for a young guy like you. And typically that debt is attainable. I'm not aware of any other way where it's as easy to get somebody to give you a whole bunch of money to use for your own gain and charge you a market interest rate. So that being said, yeah, I don't think that's a bad idea. Just make sure you can always service the debt, be a little conservative. Banks on a commercial level will always want to see that your income will cover the payment, typically 1.25 times. That's
Okay.
known as a debt coverage ratio, or DCR is an acronym that you'll hear a lot. And so that's a good rule of thumb. Just make sure that you've always got enough money coming in to cover your payments, 1.25x. And that 0.25 is the cushion in case things ever, markets change, things ever get rough. Because what's really not fun about owning real estate is if your projects or your homes aren't cash flowing, and then you've got to come up with your own money to to make the difference, to cover payments every month. That's not fun. What you
Mhm.
want to do is get money, back from you want to collect the money from your tenants, make the payment, and have money left over for you. That's fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, that's some
So
good.
I would say that's a great idea. Just make sure that you're conservative enough that you don't, lose your home and have to, force your wife to pack up boxes and move out of the house. That
Right.
takes the fun right out of it.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's a good point. I've never, because I've always heard real estate's a great way to invest your money and build wealth. And it's something that I am
Hmm.
very seriously looking at doing, but I had never heard it put in terms of that's your easiest way to access that cash, that the debt availability is just so much higher in real estate. So that's a great point in bringing that up. How did you, I mean, you've built a career in land management or land development and real estate. Where did you begin to learn these things?
Okay. I began to learn the power of real estate as a young graduate student, or I guess before I was a graduate student. So I did an MBA at BYU, and that's down where Sam lives. And I remember driving around Provo trying to find an apartment to live in, and I was kind of blown away back then at how expensive rent was and how dumpy these apartments were. I couldn't find anywhere that I wanted to live, and anything that did look decent was so expensive I couldn't bring myself to pay that much in rent. So I started racking my brain and trying to find a better way, and came across a condo project that was just being completed, and they had one unit left. You guys might be familiar with Windsor Park. It's in Provo, right off of Bulldog Boulevard and University Parkway,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm remembering correctly. And so I bought one of those units, and I remember I had to put $3,500 down. That's all it took to qualify for an FHA loan. I think I paid $104,000 for the condo. I remember my hand trembling as I wrote out the check for $3,500 because it seemed like so much money. Because I had $7,000 to my name, which back then that wasn't bad. That was probably like 20 grand now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I rented out I kept the big bedroom with a walk-in closet for myself, and then rented out the other rooms, and almost covered my payment even with me living there. And I did that for a little while. And then I moved out of the big room and rented that out for more, took one of the smaller rooms, and was able to live there for free, basically. But my roommates were paying me enough that I could make my payment. And while I was there, over a two-year period, that condo appreciated about $50,000. And so I realized that, hey, while I was going to school and I thought I wasn't getting ahead in life, I just made $50,000 without lifting a finger, by doing this. And
Mm-hmm.
that turned flipped the switch in my mind, and I knew that I was onto something. But interestingly, I tend to learn things slowly and the hard way. When I was in graduate school, it was in 1997 to 1999, and that was when the internet was just taken off, and new internet company owners were making hundreds of millions of dollars with IPOs, and so that was like everything we talked about in business school was the technology revolution and the advent of the internet and how it was going to change the world. So I got kind of sucked into that. And my first job out of graduate school was with a startup software company. And I remember forfeiting a larger salary in favor of more stock options because I thought this startup software company is going to go big and I'm going to be a multimillionaire like at 6 years old.
Uh-huh.
And that's not how that panned out. So I worked for that software company for a year, and it just kind of plugged along, didn't make a ton of money. My stock options never had any value, and I left and went and worked for another national big software company. where I had again stock options. That was kind of the thing. These big and small startup technology companies would would get people to join them for pretty small salaries, with the hope that with these stock options you were going to hit it big. So I worked for another big software company called Siebel Systems, which was a big Silicon Valley based software company. I worked there for a year. That never really went anywhere, and I wasn't happy. I did not enjoy the technology business. I felt out of place. And so during that time, I started researching real estate again, trying to kind of find a job as like a commercial broker or a commercial agent. I went to night school, real estate school, and got my real estate license while I was working at Siebel Systems, the software company. And then one day, randomly, a, a guy called me at my desk at Siebel Systems and said, "Hey, we've got a position available at Woodside Homes doing land acquisition. Are you interested in interviewing for this position?" And I obviously said yes. And I went and met with them. Fortunately for me, the founder and CEO of that company was the father of some girlfriends I had in high school, and so I had a kind of had a connection there.
Hmm.
And they hired me, and that's where I really started to learn real estate development, was at Woodside Homes doing land acquisition, and that included negotiating contracts with landowners, and more importantly, being a land project manager, where you have to go to cities to get permits, get zoning changes approved, plats approved, do all the diligence on a piece of land before you acquire it, financial due diligence and analysis to make sure the project's going to be profitable. And so I worked there for 2 years, and that's where I really got a great education and was being paid, while I was there. So that was a great opportunity. I'll always be grateful to those guys at Woodside Homes for the opportunity that provided me. And so I did that for a couple of years, and just kind of being an entrepreneur, by nature, slowly kind of felt like, hey, I don't see myself being a career long guy for Woodside Homes. So I eventually quit and started my own company, kind of doing similar things. I decided not to build homes. I saw at Woodside Homes that most of their overhead and headaches were associated with building the single family homes, but a lot of the profit margin was earned just by me and another guy doing the land acquisition and the lot development. So I decided that I would focus on that part and not get involved in the home building side. And that ended up being for me a good decision, because I've never had to have any employees, direct employees. I've hired a lot of consultants and engineers and architects and so forth, but I've never dealt with payroll, taxes, or anything like that, because I really wanted to keep my life simple. So I don't know if that was a long answer. I hope that answered your question.
No, it did. The question was, how do you learn or get started learning about real estate? And
Yeah.
you walked
Okay.
us through it.
That was, yeah.
So I've got a
So,
few follow-up questions there that I just was thinking about. And the first one was, you said that you felt like tech wasn't a good fit for you. I know tech is
mhm.
still extremely popular, especially here in the
Sure.
Provo, Utah, Silicon Slopes area. So what were kind of the downfalls that you saw there, or why did you not feel like it was your niche?
I would go to trade shows, and I could tell that my counterparts at these trade shows were really excited about the technologies that they were pitching. I subscribed to all kinds of, back then, trade magazines, and I remember going to the gym in the evening, and I'd sit on a recumbent bike reading these technology magazines, and I just could feel like had to push myself to study. And I knew, from my past, uh, how it feels to be inherently or naturally excited about something, and how much more energy and success I'd had towards things that I just naturally loved. And I could just tell that technology was not my thing. I would sit and company meetings at these software companies, really having to push myself to pay attention and try to follow along with what was going on. And when I started working for Woodside Homes, it was the opposite. I felt like, man, this is cool. Uh, Real estate is great for guys like me with average IQs because you can picture, what you're doing when you go out and develop a lot and you see the track hose installing the sewer lines and the water lines being installed and the curb and gutter being poured. It's just for me really fun to really be able to see, what you're accomplishing and what you're doing. And I loved being outside. I hated sitting at a desk in a cubicle looking at a computer screen all day. I liked to be with people, meeting with people. But probably the biggest component of real estate that I really loved was just the constant ambiguity. It was different every day. There's always a new problem to solve, and there's no textbook uh, answer as to how exactly you ought to solve it. It's really, you just have challenges that are unforeseen coming at you on a regular basis. And so if you enjoy that kind of the thrill of having to solve a problem that nobody can help you with, and it's not clear, there's no textbook, then that I enjoyed that component as well. Just a lot more action. And most real estate developers will tell you that every project will just die many, many times where you think it is over, it's dead, and you figure out a way to resurrect it and get it back, get the pulse back and move forward. So it's exciting, but stressful. You do have to be kind of the kind of person that enjoys risk, managed risk. But if you want a job where you just know what's going to happen every day and you know what to expect, and you enjoy that, then real estate development may not be for you. But if you want to have curveballs, thrown at you, and you enjoy figuring out how to deal with them, then real estate development might be a good fit for you.
That's pretty
Was there,
cool.
yeah, was there anything else at the time you were considering going into when leaving the tech industry, or was it pretty clear that real estate was where you were headed?
I think it was pretty clear that it was real estate related. I either wanted to be a commercial broker, and to explain what that is, that basically a real estate agent on a larger scale on like office buildings, commercial buildings, where you meet with clients and convince them to hire you to sell a big asset for them, and then develop your own network of potential buyers to sell these assets to, and then earn a commission. And those guys can be very successful. The big, really good commercial brokers do very, very well. There are a few, and Utah's not a huge market, but there are several commercial real estate agents and brokers in Utah that do very well. And it's a lot of action. They have to fight every day to get that listing. Somebody
Right.
wants to sell a big office building, they're going to interview several different agents, and you got to be the guy to convince them that you're their man, and then you got to perform for them. You got to go out there, they're counting on you to find the the best buyer, the most qualified buyer, and the highest price. So that's exciting too. So that was kind of that was one of the two avenues, and obviously the second being the one I eventually chose, which was development.
Okay.
So that kind of leads me to the other question that I had, which was you said that you obtained your real estate certificate and or like the ability to sell real estate. I'm forgetting what it's called right at the moment for some reason, but
Yeah, it's just a real estate license,
yeah, your real estate
usually
license.
governed by
That's the word that I
individual
was thinking of.
states.
So
Hmm.
I was curious, do you feel like that was necessary to your career? Because I've considered obtaining that a number of times. I haven't yet, but it's something that's always been on my mind. Was that necessary or was it not?
I would say not necessary, but definitely beneficial, and by no means a waste of time. Even if you end up not using it, not selling homes or assets for people, it's still what you learn by going through the just the standard real estate license courses is 100% applicable to real estate development. It's a great basis for what you'll learn as a real estate developer. So not at all a waste of time, but not mandatory either. But you're gonna one way or another, you're gonna learn the same things. You know, if you become a good real estate developer, you're going to know everything that's taught in a real estate license course. So I think it's a great way to just to get your feet wet and get in the business. You know, if you don't have a contact to help you get into the real estate development business, a great way to develop those contacts is to get a real estate license and start selling homes and learning an area and figuring out who the home builders are, who the land developers are, and maybe establish some contacts or relationships, you know, because you have a real estate license, and that could evolve into a development career opportunity with one of those companies.
I
That help?
Yeah, that answered the question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome.
I feel like when it comes to real estate investing and building wealth through it, you hear so often about rental properties or buying and flipping homes. Could you walk us through what the real estate development side of it actually is and the lot development is?
Sure. So I'll try to there I'll skip a whole bunch of small steps, but to summarize quickly, for example, a single family real estate development where you just are going to develop single family lots would start with some market research to find an area where you feel like single family homes will sell, because there's a lot of land in this country, but you know, there's a ton of land in the West Desert of Utah that's cheap, but you don't want to develop single family lots out there because nobody wants to live out there.
Mm.
So there you need to do some market research, and it's not hard, you know, it's pretty easy to figure out where people would be willing to build a home or buy a lot. Uh, then you need to establish connections with landowners. That usually land doesn't just show up for sale. It's not like buying a loaf of bread. You can't just log on somewhere and there's a whole bunch of different pieces of land just sitting there for sale, especially in this market in Utah and nationally. You know, viable parcels of land for single family usually have multiple developers chasing that, you know, that land. And we keep track of good pieces of land. Many times the landowner does not want to sell their land, but we'll maintain a relationship with them and keep in touch with them and make it known to them that when they're ready to sell, we're interested in buying, sometimes for decades. You know, one of the first big projects I did was owned by a little old lady that had had real estate developers after her for 30 years. And I was just fortunate enough to be the one that was willing to spend enough time with her, gain her trust. The timing was also right for her already. And I was kind of the lucky guy that talked her into selling me her land. It was a big 100-acre piece of land in East Layton in Davis County in Utah that was really the most desirable last piece of undeveloped land in that county on the east side, you know, east of I-15. And so that's where it starts. And then, but before you buy a piece of land, you need to do a whole bunch of research to make sure you know what you're buying. You can have problems with soil conditions, problems with environmental spills. You know, if an old farmer had been burying 50-gallon drums of used motor oil on the property for 100 years, you need to know that because that can turn into a very costly cleanup. And I can get into an experience I had where that was an issue that cost me over $1 million to remediate
Oh, wow.
on a project that fortunately was, you know, successful enough to be able to absorb that kind of a unforeseen expense. And it wasn't unforeseen the issue, but the cost of resolving the issue was about 4 times what I had budgeted for.
Wow.
So you really have a good real estate developer has a what I call a due diligence checklist, just a whole bunch of things that you check out that you make sure are okay before you buy the land. Another is, will the city or county that governs that land allow you to plan, the lots, plan the roads? Is there capacity with the utility systems around that property to supply, sewer, water, storm drain, gas, electricity, and so forth? You have to ensure that all of those systems in place can accommodate the load that you're going to add to those systems. And then you've got to figure out how to pay for it. Usually a large piece of ground is not cheap. So if you don't have the cash yourself, then you're meeting with investors and pitching them, selling them on uh, the benefit to them of investing in this project. And usually these projects do best, as I mentioned earlier, with a component of leverage or debt. And so after you raise cash or equity, then to cover the additional expenses, you're meeting with banks and convincing them that you know what you're doing, and that they would be wise to lend you the additional money that you need to acquire the land and then install all of the improvements. Putting a lot of people don't realize how much is underneath a road.
Hmm.
Uh, they think, oh, it can't be too expensive to develop single family lots, but they don't realize that there are very large, pipes, lots of them under the roads. There's dry utilities, like electricity and these days fiber. And so it's very expensive to develop a single family lot. It's a lot more than just asphalt and concrete. So, and then you hope after that's all done, by the time you buy the land and spend all the money on the infrastructure, the roads and the utilities, that you've got all these lots sitting there, and then you better really know that you can sell all those lots for more than all that money that you just put into them. So I don't know if that was a short answer, but I skipped a whole lot of small steps.
No, you're good.
So kind of what I'm hearing is there's a ton of factors to consider. And I guess my question would just be if you could dial it down into like 3 or 5 things that you look for whenever you're trying to decide where you want to develop property, what would those be?
So number one would be market research to ensure that it's in an area where once those lots or those apartments are completed, there will be demand for them. It doesn't matter how efficiently or how cheaply you can build or develop something, if nobody wants to buy it at the end, that you got a big problem. So that would be number one, is market research, making sure that those apartments are going to rent out or those single family lots are going to sell. And then number two would be just the challenge or the hurdle of actually finding a piece of land that somebody is willing to sell in that area. And it's in an area where the utilities are available, where the city would smile upon what you want to do, because it's very common to want to do a real estate development project, and the planning commission and city council members at the city, the governing members of that city, don't like what you want to do, and they won't vote for it and they won't approve it. And so it's really a cool career, because you've got to be a politician, you got to be a banker, you got to be an engineer, you got to be an architect, you got to be a market research expert. You really have to know a lot, you got to have a certain level of expertise in multiple fields, even the law. I mean, I like to think that I could review a real estate purchase contract more thoroughly than a whole lot of attorneys could, just because of my experience, specifically with those. So, and that's part of what makes it fun, is one day you're a lawyer, obviously not bar certified, but and then a lot of lawyers do become real estate developers for that reason. It's very beneficial to understand the law, but you got to understand finance, you got to understand math, you got to understand, have just kind of a dangerous level of understanding of civil engineering and architecture, and then again just business, marketing, market research specifically. So that's kind of part of what makes it fun. You're wearing a whole lot of different hats to make one of these projects happen.
Sounds pretty fun to me. Like you can just kind of do lots
Yeah,
of different things.
it's a, it's a blast. It's kind of like, walking up to a big tall mountain that's got a lot of rocks and snow and ice, and somebody says, "Hey, you think we can climb that?" And if you're like, "Hey, you like the thought of pushing yourself and seeing if you can really do it," that's kind of how real estate development feels when you start a project. It's like, all right, this is a gnarly, nasty mountain. Can we climb it? And you have to get yourself fired up and and go for it.
Mm. It seems like there's a lot of people who have done well for themselves that have gone out looking for a challenge, and there's got to be
For
something
sure.
inside you that leads you to that. But is that part of what the appeal for this was at the beginning for you? Is you're like, I mean, obviously you were trying to get out of the tech sphere, but was there something saying that looks challenging and I kind of think that seems fun? I want the challenge.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and I think certain personality types are more that way than others. But my goal when I started was simply just to provide well for my family. I've
Mm-hmm.
always, I had a wonderful father that coached me in sports, that was there, attending all of his kids' events, and I wanted to follow his example. My personal values are such that I feel like my relationships with my wife and my children and extended family and close friends are what matter most to me. And so really my primary motivator was, hey, I just want to make enough money that I can have uh, some flexibility in my life. I don't want to have a boss. I knew when I worked for these companies, Woodside included, that I did not like having a vacation policy, where they told me how many days I could spend with my family a year. That just didn't
Mm-hmm.
sit right with me. And so I wanted to be in charge of my life and take control over how much time I spend with on what matters most to me,
Mm-hmm.
which was my family. And so that was my primary motivator. But no doubt, you still, when you're trying to provide for your family, you got to get out of bed and go to work all day every day. And I definitely wanted to do something that wasn't boring because I'd had boring jobs, and real estate development just was not boring. At Woodside Homes there, the 2 years that I was there went by just in a blink because every day was exciting and different, and I just was never bored. I literally looked forward to going to work on, I remember Sunday evenings after having spent a lot of time with my family, starting to feel a little antsy, like I'm getting a little bored. I'm looking forward to going to work Monday morning because I know it's going to be kind of a brawl, and I loved that. It was exciting, and time passes quickly. And when work is an exciting challenge, it doesn't feel like work. To me, work is anything that's boring.
Uh, well,
You
I'm
know,
definitely trying to create a similar career where I can go off and do my own thing and be in charge and take control the way you were describing. Um, and it's proving to be a challenge for sure. And I'm hoping it
yeah.
always will be. That way I don't get bored. Um, what do you think someone needs to know in order to pursue something like that? Because it is so much easier to come out of college and try and get recruited and just get a job and be under the control of someone else for the rest of your life. What does it take
hmm
to step away from that?
Well, that's one thing I really respect about your generation is I feel like, a lot of generations before you measured success uh, just with dollar figures. Who has the biggest house? Who has the flashiest car? And it kind of seems to me that your generation, and having spent a lot of time around my kids, that a lot of you kind of grew up with that, maybe in a big house and your dad had a cool car and you're like, ah, that's cool, but it's not what makes me happy. And it's almost like you're smarter than we were and you figured out that, hey, you know, relationships are what truly matter to me and make me happy. And so I think that's great. And I'm losing track of what your original question was.
No worries.
Remind me.
Yeah. It was, that's the life we're trying to create. What does someone have to know going
Yeah.
into creating that? What does it
Okay.
take to create a life like that where you can step away? Especially because, I mean, right now I'm in my last semester of school, and
Yeah.
BYU's main focus is let's get you recruited, let's get you into a job, let's get you working for Boeing or for Wells Fargo or for
Right.
some big investment banker, anything like that, some big company. And it's like, no, that's not the direction I want. I don't want to be
Yeah.
working 80 hours a week for someone else.
No, I don't blame you. I mean, if you go take the job with Boeing and you're going to stick it out there, I mean, you're going to be there for 40 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I remember at Woodside, really working hard one year, and I got a bonus, and I contributed the maximum amount to my retirement plan. And at the end of a year of really, working hard and putting in extra hours and extra hustle, I had increased my net worth $30,000. And that's by a lot of standards, that's great at that age. But I thought, all right, if I want to retire in 30 years and I only save up 30 grand a year, that's only $900,000 by the time I'm, 65 years old. That just is not, that doesn't sound like enough. And so I just knew that I was working really hard for not a lot. And it was a great job at the time. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
relative to the market, it was a great opportunity. Um, but I think you do have to be willing, especially when you're young, because I worked my tail off. I mean, I worked Saturdays, I worked late, I hardly slept because I was thinking about my next move. So that's one thing, and you guys have been around, Casey and Corbin, uh, that founded Giving Home Healthcare, and they've been very successful. And I grew up with those two, and their dad made them work, and
Mm-hmm.
my parents made me work, and I don't know that any of the three of us are you're geniuses. I mean, we're pretty smart, but really, we've all been successful because we don't mind working really hard. We enjoy it, and we somehow we're raised to believe that we could do what we set our minds to. Somehow our moms or somebody or dads taught us some confidence that we could do tough stuff. And those, if you are confident, even if it's false confidence, that's better than not being confident enough. But if you are willing to work your tail off and you believe that you can reach your goals, then you probably will. But you can also work really hard at just the wrong industry, because some industries
Mm-hmm.
just are not very profitable, you know. Uh, and so you want to do some homework, and I think you two are on the right track where you're trying to figure out which industries are inherently more profitable than others, and that's smart because I've seen guys really work really, really hard in a line of business that just is inherently not very profitable, and they never really get ahead in life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's a combination of being smart, doing your homework, and working really hard. But I've always anybody that's ever asked my advice, I've said, hey, get a strong enough education that a company that is very profitable will want to hire you. Get a job at that company, and don't work for a company that doesn't make a lot of money. Why would you want to learn how to make not a lot of money? Go work for a company that makes a lot of money, and learn, work hard, learn how to do what they do, and when the time is right, go compete against them. And they make it hard to do that these days with non-compete agreements, and you may have to be willing to move out of state. Casey and Corbin both. I mean, I remember Corbin calling me one day. He and I shared a snowmobile trailer, and we both had our snowmobiles in it. And he called me out of the blue one day, totally out of the blue, and said, "Hey, I sold our trailer. I've got a check for you, and your snowmobile is in my parents' garage. I'm moving to New Mexico."
What a fun phone call to get.
And I was like, "Dude, you did what?" But of course, I respected him doing what he had to do to find success for himself, and he was willing to move his family from Ogden, Utah, where he grew up, where his parents were, where his wife's parents were, and moved to New Mexico and start his own company. So you got to be willing, especially when you're young, to do, really, you got to be willing to do stuff that most people aren't willing to do.
Hmm.
I saw a meme. Have you guys seen that meme where there's two tables and there's a big line of people at one table, and it says, I think that table will label as success, and then the other table says those who are willing to do what it takes to be successful, and there's nobody in line at that table. And
Yeah.
that's a lot of people. There's a lot of people that sign up for seminars, get rich quick seminars. There's a lot of real estate
Mhm.
house flipping development seminars, and the trainer says, hey, I can teach you how to get rich quick, and people sign up, and they usually quickly find out that it's not as easy as the trainer made it sound, and then they fizzle out and quit.
Mhm.
So you really got to get educated. You really do, uh, you really do need to become an expert in what you're doing. I mean, this may sound arrogant, but I consider myself an expert in real estate development. I feel like I have learned, you know, everything I need to know to be a successful real estate developer. Much like guys that have been very successful have become experts in their respective fields. You
Mhm.
find somebody that has founded their own company and been very successful. They could easily teach a course on that industry at any university, and they'd teach it, very, very well, better than most PhDs would, because they've lived it.
Mhm.
So you've talked a lot about how real estate is not boring. So what I would want to hear is, what do you think are some of the highlights of your career, maybe some of the most exciting moments that you've been able to enjoy by doing real estate?
Okay. Well, I think I mentioned something along these lines earlier, but most real estate development projects will die, multiple deaths.
Yeah.
And so anytime you can resurrect one that looks like it's done, that's a thrill. That's a rush. You dodged a bullet. You saved the queen in that instant. So you get a lot of those. But the real exciting ones are when you really get the project across the finish line. For example, a few years ago, I finished the largest project I'd ever done, and to finally complete the last unit on a very large apartment project, and then get the long-term financing locked in, and the project is done. That's pretty thrilling, to drive through uh, this project's 531 units, and to drive through it and see, 500 plus families living in a project that you built. That it's going to be successful for the next 20 years, because we just locked in a 20-year, really great low interest rate loan, and it's going to cash flow very well for the next 20 years. That's what you're working for, was to get it done. And so anytime you get one of these big projects just across the finish line where it's done, that's a real thrill. But those don't come very often. I mean, the particular project I just referenced was an 8-year project, from the time I started researching that particular parcel of land and buying it, until it was completely built and up and running and complete, was 8 years. So yeah, when you work on something, really, really hard for 8 years, and you finally get it done, that's pretty sweet. And the cool thing is it's sweet every month, because I get a little wire in my bank account every month from that project that just reminds me of what I accomplished over those 8 years.
That's
That's
sweet.
cool.
Yeah, it's fun.
So then what I would want to know is, how do you actually get to the point to where you build apartment complexes and develop those? Because like we talked about, you can get started in single family, you can start with those, but then how does one actually make the jump to buying, selling, creating apartment complexes? Because that would be really intriguing for me.
That's a good question, and it's you kind of need to, and it's pretty hard to just, out of the blue decide you're going to build a 100 unit apartment project.
Mm.
You know, the you got to have the money, and so you got to have relationships with investors that trust you. And so it is very tough on the first project when you're going to people saying, "Hey, I want you to put $5 million into this apartment project," and their first question is, "Have you ever done this before?" And when your answer is no, I haven't, that's tough. That's a really big hurdle to overcome. And so that's why it's helpful to work for a company. I built and I managed and oversaw the construction of a multifamily project while I was at Woodside Homes. It was the first one they had ever done, and I kind of played a little bit of a part in convincing the upper management to do it because I had interest in multifamily. And so I was able, when I started my own company, to look investors in the eyes and say, "Yeah, I have done this before. Here's here's an example of a project I've done. Here's what it cost, and here's how much money we made on it when we sold it." And so it is tough. I don't know very many people that have just out of the blue decided I'm going to build an apartment project, without some previous experience under somebody else's tutelage or another company's umbrella. That's pretty tough. But to summarize, you gotta have some experience. You got to know what you're doing, and that's best learned, through working for another company or in a scholastic setting. University of Utah has a Master's of Real Estate Development degree, along with, I think, USC does, Columbia does. There's several schools across the country that have master's degrees in real estate development. That's very helpful because it's not all intuitive. It's not very realistic to say, "Hey, I'm gonna give this a shot all by myself and figure it out." Although I say that coming from an era where we didn't have all these YouTube videos and all the resources that you have nowadays. For all I know, you might be able to find somebody on YouTube. In fact, I do know of one company that actually does actually a really good job of training people how to do real estate projects. So you may be able to learn. I mean, I know you can learn a lot online about how to do this. You Google, how do I build an apartment project and stay up all night reading? You're going to learn a lot, but you still have the hurdle of going to an investor and a bank, and because you're going to need both of those. And if you've never done, a lot of banks just will not. Their policy is, "We will not lend you money for an apartment project if this is your first one. Go somewhere else."
Mm.
So it's really helpful to work with somebody, maybe find a real estate developer and say, "Hey, can I be your assistant and work for you for a couple of years and learn how to do this?" And, something along those lines where you could go tell people, "Yeah, I've done this before." That's really helpful. So it's tough when you're young and you just haven't done it yet. That's the toughest time. That is the time of life where most aspiring real estate developers get weeded out.
Mm. That makes sense. I figured that most people probably don't just go like, all of a sudden I'm going to go build an apartment complex. I don't think that's quite the path that most people would probably take. Um, and have you heard about real estate syndication? If so, what's your opinion on it?
Well, give me a little more context because there are a few different types of syndicates. Could you give me a
So
little
the
more
the ones that I'm talking
context?
about are like companies that they go and raise money to then buy large scale apartment complexes for real estate. Um, and then once they raise the money, they have it in there for about 5 years, and they do cash out refinances every 5 years, repay the
Hmm.
investors, and then also use it to go and purchase other apartment complexes. That's
Okay.
kind of the syndicates that I'm
Yeah.
talking about.
S- So have you heard of Grant Cardone? You ever watched the TV
Mhm.
show
Yeah,
Undercover Billionaire?
I
Okay.
watched when
That's
he
what
was
he
in it. Yeah.
does. Yeah. So that's what he does. And if you watch that show, you learned about Grant that he's super scrappy, but not really any smarter than anybody else. right? I mean, he made a lot of dumb mistakes on that show where you're like, okay, I mean, he's got spunk and he's got fire, but he's not a genius. You know, we saw him on that show do some, I thought, some pretty dumb things. Uh, but he has a huge company in Florida, you know, where that's exactly what they do. They can, and he has people working for him that are very smart. I've spent a lot of time. I considered it actually investing with his company just a few months ago, and spent a lot of time with some of his analysts, and they're top notch. They
Wow.
had every answer. They had a good answer for every question, and that's exactly what he does. Is they raise equity? You know, they raise funds, uh, and that in and of itself is a whole ball game. You know, you've got to be compliant. There are all sorts of compliance issues that come with raising an investment fund. And he started to do a fund with non-accredited investors, which is even hairier, you know, where people with lower net worths can invest small amounts of money. But that's exactly what they do is they get get people to invest money. They try to take that cash and then leverage it, you know, borrow money with that equity, with that cash to buy big apartment projects, and then they manage them well. They depreciate the projects. That you can accelerate the depreciation for tax benefit, for tax advantages to the investors, and then Cardone Capital's company, and then they keep them for 5 to 7 years and kind of use up that accelerated depreciation, and then from my understanding is that they typically sell projects and take the money and go buy more and start the depreciation clock all over again. But I think those are I mean, there actually was a time in the past where I considered starting one of those,
Hmm.
but concluded that that was contrary to the lifestyle that I wanted to live. You've got to, that's a big commitment. You've got to have, you know, that's a whole nother ball game. You've got to have a lot of employees. You've got to be willing to own and manage a lot more projects. My philosophy is I would rather own a much fewer projects, but own all of them than own a whole bunch of projects, but only own a percentage of them. And his philosophy is otherwise. You know, he owns a whole lot more units than I do, but he doesn't own them all himself. He owns just a fraction of all of them, and his investors own the majority of them.
Hmm.
So he's got a lot more headache, you know, than I have.
That
But
makes sense.
he might be making a lot more money too. I don't know,
I uh I was
but I don't
approached.
really care
I
because
guess
I
that's
make
true.
enough.
I was approached by a
Yeah.
real estate syndicator that I'd done an internship with at BYU, and he
Uh-huh.
offered me a position to work as a capital raiser, to then
Uh-huh.
start, so then I could get sweat equity in the deals, because it's pretty hard to raise capital right now to buy apartment complexes and stuff. So I've been trying to consider if that's a good route to take to start learning the real estate game, because then
I
like
think
I
it
could work
is.
with an established company, they have a team, um,
I think it
and
totally is.
okay. So yeah, I just kind of wanted
Yeah.
to hear your thoughts about that. So
Mm.
Yeah. No, anytime you can just be around an office that's doing stuff like that, I think that could be great experience. One of the wealthiest guys I know never built anything. He started out, you know, buying a duplex, and he took care of it, rented it out, and as soon as it appreciated enough that he could refinance it and pull the equity out and go buy another one, he did. And so for years he just had, you know, 2 units, 4 units, 8 units, 16 units over 5, 10 years, and now he's a billionaire. And so yeah, you can do some damage, you know, without ever building. I went a different route. Where all the apartments I own, I built.
mhm.
Um, but I suspect that I got, you know, to a higher level of success faster by willing to go that route. But there's nothing. Mine was more risky. You know, when you build stuff versus just buy something that's already built and proven and operating, you are taking more risk. So no, doing working for a company like you just described, I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all.
Okay.
Is it a good idea to go after both routes? Like start in one of them and
Yeah,
branch out and then keep rolling with both of them?
yeah, for sure. I mean, you can learn. If you work for this, like for example, this company Sam just brought up, I'm confident that that company has relationships with developers, and that, being around, say this company is going to buy a project that's under construction. Sam could say, hey, why don't you let me kind of keep an eye on construction to make sure, we're really going to get what we're paying for, and let me start going to their weekly construction meetings and just start learning, what that developer is doing. So yeah, I think you can. I mean, you're going to have to kind of get creative and push yourself a little bit, but yeah, I think if you wanted to be a developer though, Sam, and you wanted to build,
Hmm.
I would probably encourage you to try to get a job with a developer so that from day one you're learning real estate development. But, if one of my kids came to me and said, "Hey, I've seen what you went through, Dad, building stuff and the stress and the risk, and I don't really want to go that route. I want to work for a big syndicator or a big fund, doing diligence on big apartment acquisitions." I would say, great, go for it. Those guys that learn how to do that do very well.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah. Does that help?
Yeah, that helps a bunch. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, sure.
If you don't mind, can we kind of pivot? You talked about the most important thing in your life is your family and your relationships.
Sure.
How did you, I mean, because it sounds like you worked so hard and so much. How did you get to a point where you had the freedom to then give them as much time as you're wanting to?
I just made them a priority and took that freedom from day one.
Mm-hmm.
So the day I started my own company, you know, my two sons weren't born yet. I had two little girls, and they were young enough that they didn't really need their dad yet. But if they had a preschool graduation, I went. I just said, hey, I'm not missing anything. And if I have to work Saturday, or if I have to work late, Thursday night till 10 p.m. to catch up, then I'll do it. So I just took that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the day I quit my job was the day I took that freedom and just decided I'm not missing anything. And that worked out great, and when I wasn't at some event, I was in gear. I was hustling. And I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
remember, early on when I started my own company, playing in a basketball game on a Saturday morning and having a great time because it was a nice escape from all the pressure and stress, and the and we just won the game. The final buzzer sounded, and the second that buzzer sounded, I remember just kind of getting a knot in my stomach, like, oh, you don't have time to sit here and high five the guys on the team. You got to get to work.
Yeah.
And so I went straight home and got back to work,
Uh,
on a Saturday.
yeah.
Wow.
So, but I just took the freedom, that was mine.
Yeah. So it wasn't, I mean, in a way it was earned, but in reality, you don't have to put in the work to earn it. You made a decision and you
I
worked along the
I
way.
had Yeah, well, let's put it this way. I had to put in the work to keep it.
Okay.
You know, I
Hmm.
I claimed my freedom and tasted it and loved it and knew I could never go back to working for somebody with a vacation policy. And that
Uh-huh.
was very powerful motivation. I had no choice but to be successful. You've heard the phrase, and I'm not familiar with the whole story. I was at one time, burn the boats, where
Hmm.
Hmm.
where a force goes to an island to conquer it, and they get off their boats and they burn them. They leave themselves no choice but to conquer the island.
Hmm.
And having tasted of that freedom and just deciding, hey, it's mine. I'm keeping it. Nobody's going to take this away from me. uh, just forced me to do whatever I had to do to be successful. And it's amazing what I look back and I'm like, wow, I don't know if I could do that again, because it is stressful. It is exhausting. It takes all you got. and you need you look back and you're super grateful for your wife's love and support because you needed it, because
Mhm.
it's a fight. And but yeah, sometimes you got to give yourself no choice but to be successful. And I think most people would be surprised. I really believe most people never live up to their full potential. Not me, and me included. Not many of us know what we could really do if it meant, life or death.
Mhm.
We all have an extra gear and maybe an extra few gears that most of us never shift into. And so you got to be willing to put yourself in that position where you got no choice.
Okay.
So I kind of just want to ask you about a specific part of what you're just saying, which I thought was fantastic. How did you manage to keep your relationship with your wife strong during that time period? Was there like an agreement that you guys had made in the beginning that, hey, this is what you want to do. It's going to be hard, but it's going to be worth it in the end? Or was it more just it developed over time? She's just the right woman. Like
That's
how did this
yeah,
happen?
that's a great question, because we all know of stories where a guy has sacrificed his important relationships for a career,
Yeah.
and that's tragic. Um, I don't remember us ever. We made every decision together. I didn't come home and say, "Hey, guess what, honey? I quit my job at Woodside today." She knew. We talked about it and agreed upon it. It was us. Everything we did was together. And when I had challenges with projects, you know, I would talk with her about them. She knew. I mean, my wife could be a real estate developer. I guarantee it.
Mm.
She knows it all because she has heard it, from me over the last
Mhm.
20 years. Uh, and so it really brought us closer together because it was a fight. She knew what was going on. I needed her love and support. There were many times that I was down or discouraged or feeling like, man, I don't know, if I can turn this around. And she knew the situation, understood it, and was loving and supportive. And there's no question in my mind that I couldn't have been successful without her love and support. So I would say, just because of the way we did things and and were teammates through all of it, it really brought us together. And I'm grateful that I was married to the kind of woman that was willing to roll up her sleeves. I mean, can you imagine how scary it would be to be reliant, to be pregnant and have another little girl, and you're relying on this young dude? He's telling you he can quit his job and go make more money doing it on his own. I mean, that would be terrifying to trust somebody that much, right?
Yeah.
And she did. She trusted me, believed in me, and the confidence she had in me for sure was a huge contributor to me being successful.
That's
But
fantastic.
yeah, you're right. You gotta have the right woman for sure. I mean, I don't know that every woman would be willing or able to go through that with you. I don't know. I've never been married to more than one woman. Never, don't have any marriage experience with anybody else. But that being said, women are tough. A lot tougher than most men give them credit for. And they are, they're trusting and supportive. And so I think, there's a whole lot of good women out there that could help a driven man be successful.
Mhm.
And I think that there's a lot of, you look statistically, most high net worth men are married.
Mhm.
There's statistics that prove that married men are much more successful financially and in other ways than single men are. I think that's an undisputed statistic.
Do you
I believe it.
do you mind describing to us what you feel, both career wise and then family, personal life wise, what your biggest successes have been so far, or a fun story of one of your successes at least?
For sure. One comes to mind immediately, and that is the family that I have. I've got a great marriage. My wife and I have been married for 24 years. We are just as excited to see each other after period of absence now as we were when we were dating. It's awesome. She and I both had separate lunch appointments today, and when I got back, I was excited to see her. I hadn't seen her all morning, and I missed her. And that's taken work. We go on date nights on Friday nights, just almost no matter what, make our marriage and our relationship a priority. And whenever we feel like we're drifting or we're feeling a little bit off, we jump on it and make sure that we get back on track. And so I really think people get married obviously for a reason. They're in love. Hopefully they're in love and they're excited. And I would hope that then this doesn't happen, but it would be wise if people, as soon as they realize they're slipping a little bit in their relationship, it's not quite what it used to be. They're not as excited to see each other as they once were. Jump on it. And it does take work. You need to talk. You need to spend time together. You need to figure things out. It's great relationships, I believe, over a long period of time have taken effort. I don't think anybody just falls in love head over heels and with no maintenance, it just stays that way forever after. I just think relationships tend to naturally deteriorate unless you are proactively, you know, taking care of it and nursing it. And the second you realize it's off, it's an emergency, and you're dealing with it to get back on the same page. And so, my number one success, I think, is the fact that I'm very happily married, 24 years later. And then right behind that is the the pride that I have towards my four kids. We put a lot of work into them. We've made a really big effort, a lot of work. I mean, hard work to always make sure they know we love them, to teach them correct principles and values every morning and every night on their way to bed, to be in attendance at everything that's important to them. And I've got four just awesome kids, and I'm really proud of them. I don't know if we did something right or if we just didn't mess them up. Honestly, a lot of people say that. They may have just come, awesome,
Mhm.
but they're my five best friends on this planet are my wife and my four kids. And to be able to say that is hands down my greatest accomplishment. If I was dirt poor and I could still say that, I'm good. That's
Mhm.
fine. So yeah, to put all of this real estate stuff, conversation into perspective, you know,
Yeah.
n- who wants to die alone with $1 billion in the bank? You can't take it with you. Nobody cares. Nobody loves you. Nobody admires you. To be honest with you, it seems like the richer you are, the more people don't like you anyway. But, you know,
Yeah.
family is everything.
Yeah. It was all pretty much just a means to create the life you wanted.
Exactly. Yep.
Mhm.
Exactly. And I really think you're much more likely to be successful if that's your motivation. I've seen so many guys make their motivation was something else, usually something that's not a pure motive, that might be a little vain. And that those guys invariably make a mistake that hurts them financially. You know,
Mhm.
your motivation should be to make money. And I see guys that want to make a name for themselves. They want to be famous. They want to be well known. And the second you start making business decisions that are motivated by some motive other than just making money, you're gonna make a bad decision. And at some point you could just find yourself starting over. That can happen anyway. You
Right.
can have the proper
Right.
motivation, and sometimes it's just not your lot in life to be successful. I mean, because I've seen that too.
Yeah.
I've had things go my way, and I've seen guys that were very smart, very hardworking, pure motives, and something bad happens, and they go broke, and that just wasn't their lot in life to make a lot of money. But as long as their family is with them and they've got good relationships there, they seem to still be happy and just fine.
Yeah. So if we could wrap up with one question, we like to end by asking if there was a press release written about your life down the road, either something successful in your career, something successful in your life, what would you want that press release to say?
Something along the lines of he was a committed and loyal husband, a loving and devoted father, a loyal friend, and contributor, to society, and advocate for those less fortunate. Something like that. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't care if it didn't say anything about, me being a real estate developer or a successful businessman or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
No,
No,
nobody really cares about that stuff in the end, right? When you think of the
right.
people that you like the most or love the most, it you don't care how much money they have.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Something
thank you
like
for,
that.
no, I
Hope that
appreciate it.
didn't
Thanks
sound
for
too
helping us.
cheesy, but that's how I
That's
feel.
fantastic.
Yeah.
No, not at all. It helps put things back into perspective, right? I mean, we kind of ended up with you saying that it was all a means to create the life you wanted anyways and the relationship you wanted anyway. So why should your press release have anything to do with the way you got there? It should be the end goal that you had.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, this has
Well,
been very fun. Thanks so much for having me. It's really fun to be around young guys that I are clearly motivated and going to be successful. And it's going to be exciting for me to keep track of you guys and see what you're up to 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road.
yeah. Thank you very much for your time. It was a blast. We had a great time talking to you.
Yes,
Awesome.
this was phenomenal. We really appreciate it.